Grazie, Dottore Messa. And thank you for the initiative today and for the invitation to take part this afternoon. I have a prepared text which I'll try to get through as quickly as possible and to reduce if possible. But it'll form hopefully a useful complement to the interventions which we've heard already this afternoon. The Holy See actively participated in the preparatory process for drafting the 2030 Agenda, as it did also at the Third International Conference on Financing for Development in Addis Ababa, where an ambitious plan of action was adopted to help implement the 2030 Agenda. These documents constitute an important sign of hope, to borrow the words of Pope Francis to the General Assembly of the UN on the 25th of September last. Since the spirit that underpins the 2030 Agenda, the Paris Accord, and the Addis Ababa Plan of Action is a renewed assumption of responsibility, from which flows the decisive desire on the part of governments and peoples to develop our political and economic life so that they might improve society and the environment, obtaining for everyone a higher quality of life and one imbued with meaning. The fundamental goal of the major accords of the international community in 2015, in fact, is a moral or ethical goal. It's not the role of the Holy Father to offer detailed technical, economic, or scientific solutions to the challenges confronting humanity. Rather, he seeks to marshal the deepest motivations for a human activity worthy of its proper dignity, and to propose these for our consideration. Thus, at the United Nations, the Pope reminded us that a selfish and boundless thirst for power and material prosperity leads both to the misuse of available natural resources and to the exclusion of the weak and the disadvantaged. Those, we may add, who often do not have access to information, to adequate technical instruments, to decision-making process, and who consequently remain excluded or, worse still, cast off by society. Since economic and social exclusion is a complete denial of human fraternity and a grave offense against human rights and the environment, for the Holy Father, the what cannot be but be identified with the how, in the sense that no aim will be effectively reached in a permanent way if it is not seen and felt as a strong call to responsibility for those who make decisions in society. We must avoid every temptation to fall into a declarationist nominalism which would assuage our consciences, a quotation from the speech. In this context, it seems timely to ask ourselves about how we can orient and coordinate our various economic, social, and environmental policies towards a similar and common objective. Here too, Pope Francis at the UN traced out the ethical foundations upon which the debate must rest. Political and economic action must be guided by a concept of justice rooted in the realization that behind the plans and the programs there are concrete human beings who live and suffer and who in many cases are deprived of their rights. If this basic perspective is lost, political activity risks being reduced to a merely bureaucratic or statistical exercise. Thus, a constant and sincere discussion about the implementation and results of plans and programs is needed, one that will account of all those involved and is based on respect for the dignity of man. The Holy Father in Laudato Si returns frequently to the concept of dialogue, a dialogue that focuses its attention on a different style of life. It means promoting a knowledge of our common origin, of our mutual belonging, and a future to be shared with everyone. It's on the basis of this awareness that we can and must develop new convictions, new behaviors, a new style of life. We stand before a great cultural and spiritual and educational challenge that will demand a long path of renewal. The great challenge springs from the fact that behind all the economic problems, there is always an anthropological problem that has its origin in a limited concept of man. Money is always and only an instrument of social relations. A society that establishes consumption as its principal objective, however, transforms money into the goal of all human activity and even into an object of veneration, because it represents the satisfaction of all material desires and cravings. There is here a clear confusion between means and ends, coming from a great impoverished vision that reduces man solely to his needs, to consumption. Thus the Pope forcefully declares no to money when it governs rather than serves. Money must serve, not rule. But to avoid the rule by money, the relation of man to technology must also be redefined. Technological man considers himself potentially omnipotent, limited only by the practical impossibility at present of obtaining certain results. Ethical thought, thus, becomes an exercise in finding justifications for what is possible today, with the implicit belief that justifications will also be found for what will become possible tomorrow. The fundamental problem then arises from the way in which humanity succumbs to a homogeneous and one-dimensional technocratic paradigm, with the claim to be able, thanks to technology, to define and govern everything, even one's own nature as one wishes. A boundless trust in the physical, mathematical sciences and in technology, which is not linked to a moral and philosophical acceptance of the fundamental dignity of man, leads to a manipulation of men and women and to the subjugation of the weak. Nevertheless, it must never be forgotten that the human being represents a novelty not fully explicable by natural evolution. Each person has his own identity, capable of entering into dialogue with others and with God. The capacity for reflection, for creativity, for artistic expression are original abilities that go beyond and transcend the merely physical and biological sphere. From this perspective, religion also assumes an important role, since it always regards the human person as a subject who can never be reduced to the category of an object. The transcendence of man and the particularity of his relations with others and with nature are elements that cannot be measured by physics, nor by econometrics, nor by financial mathematics. Recognition of this, however, is essential for the ordinary functioning of society, and ignorance or lack of interest in it at the root of the grave ills of our world today. The words of Pope Francis at the UN General Assembly underline this reality. In reference to the vast numbers of the excluded and to the natural environment, he said, "These sectors are closely interconnected and made increasingly fragile by dominant political and economic relationships. This is why their rights must be forcefully affirmed by working to protect the environment and putting an end to exclusion." All the responses the Holy See offers to the question of the exclusion of the poorest and of the environment are based on ethics of human dignity, of responsibility, of the transcendence of man, and ethics of sober personal life that is ordered towards the service of others. In these terms, the social doctrine of the Church proposes a very positive vision of the possibilities for human freedom, when human actions are guided by a solid anthropology. Again, Pope Francis reminds us that humanity still has the capacity to collaborate in the building of our common home. We have freedom, intelligence, and the potential to direct and guide technology and to cultivate and limit our own power in order to put it at the service of another kind of progress, healthier, more human, more social, and more integrated. As I have already indicated, this calls us to promote a courageous cultural revolution, conscious that science and technology are not neutral, but can be harbingers of different intentions and possibilities, which lead to varying results. It is possible to put science and technology at the services of the environment. It is possible to produce more inclusive and less polluting models of production, and this is a work that can involve the poor, arranged in cooperative or small enterprise groups. It is possible, too, to put big companies and corporations at the service of integral human development, since business is a vocation, and a noble vocation, provided that those engaged in it see themselves challenged by a greater meaning in life, and are truly capable of putting themselves at the service of the common good and making the goods of this world more easily accessible. In his address to the UN General Assembly, the Holy Father also offered some ethical considerations for the technical measuring of economic activity and progress, for the preservation of the environment, and for the ideal of a sustainable development. To remove men and women from extreme poverty, it is necessary that they be agents worthy of their destiny. Integral human development and the full exercise of human dignity cannot be imposed. but must be built and realized through a common endeavor that sees every person and family as a protagonist in a context of collaboration and of right relations with all those spaces where human society is formed. Such collaboration is founded on the right to education and on the primary right of the family to educate, as well as on the right of churches and social groups to sustain and assist families in the education of their sons and daughters. Furthermore, education plays an essential role in the realization of the 2030 Agenda and in the promotion of concern for the environment. Political agents, and especially those who govern, must ensure that all people can have access to the minimum material and spiritual means needed to live in dignity and to create and support a family, which is the primary cell of any social development. The Pope himself enumerates the essential elements of this absolute minimum, distinguishing between the material and the spiritual aspects. In the material realm, the necessary means include a home, work, and land. And in the spiritual realm, these necessary means include spiritual freedom, including religious freedom, the right to education, and other civil rights. The litmus test of the effectiveness with which the new agenda is implemented will be then the effective, practical, and immediate access on the part of all to essential material and spiritual goods. Entering into details, the Holy Father mentions a proper home, dignified work and just remuneration, adequate food and water, religious liberty, and in general, spiritual liberty and education. These are the pillars of an authentic, integral human development, all of which have a common foundation, the right to life, which we can call also the right of the same human nature to exist. To conclude, I want to affirm that the substantial response to all the questions around the applicability and effectiveness of the Sustainable Development Objectives contained in the 2030 Agenda and of the Paris Accord and the Addis Ababa Plan of Action comes from an ethical foundation. The teachings of the Holy Father, especially as contained in the Apostolic Exhortation Evangelii Gaudium, the encyclical letter Laudato Si, and in the discourses at the UN in New York and Nairobi, offer fundamental ethical proposals, beginning with a realistic and integral conception of human dignity and its social aspect, which are at the same time necessary for an effective implementation of the Sustainable Development Objective and a guarantee of its attainment. I'd just like to one final remark to indicate a little bit on what I've heard this afternoon, a word of encouragement to the degree that I think we have traveled a very long way. 20 years ago, I was also working in Rome and in the same department that I now have the honor to head. At that time, there was a particular environmental issue which came across my desk. And as we do in the Vatican, we wrote a little summary of the matter and made some proposals. And I can remember writing on this file that wouldn't it be a nice idea if the Pope wrote an encyclical on the environment? It went up to my boss, Archbishop Toron, and I was summoned to his office. And I was told that this was a very nice idea, but we couldn't have the Holy Father, John Paul II at the time, becoming overly identified, which was then, in those days, considered the exclusive prerogative of the Verdi, or the Greens. And so the matter rested there until Pope Francis came. Thank you very much.